And welcome to another live video that I am doing today on Safe Space Arena. I know I have not been doing lives for the past couple of weeks and things have been a bit hectic, but today I decided to come on here because something interesting happened this week. There's a therapist on Twitter who's called Lori Gottlieb. For those of you who don't know who she is, you should check her out. She has this amazing book. It's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. It's a very good book. I read it, I enjoyed it, and you should check it out. So the reason I'm bringing up Lori is because she was trending to a degree because she shared a conversation she had in therapy with a client. But from the way she said, it's not necessarily one specific client that she talked about. She was talking about just like a vignette of some sort. Like she was picking out a story and just compiling it into one cohesive story that she can tell to give an example of something that happened in therapy. So she was not pointing out one specific person who said X, Y, and Z. But then the way she put it like it's a quote taken directly from a conversation in therapy. And so the reason she was trending was that people were under the impression that she broke confidentiality. And this is something that has come up a lot in the last couple of years since we started seeing therapists on social media, and especially on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And yeah, that has been a big discussion. So Lori was being told by other therapists and by other people that she broke confidentiality by bringing up this story, by talking about the thing that she was compiling about therapy, about this specific about these clients that she was seeing that week. And you can check out the tweet itself just to be sure about what happened. And yeah, that tweet and that reaction that Lori got because of that tweet that she made is the reason why I'm doing this live, because I think it's important for us to talk about boundaries in therapy and to talk about confidentiality deeper, because many therapists are breaking confidentiality without knowing that they're breaking confidentiality. And it is a problem because as a therapist, when you see your story trending on the internet, when you see your therapist using material you spoke about in therapy as content for social media, it can be very uncomfortable because you are wondering at what point will they stop talking about this, or at what point will they continue talking about me outside there, even if they are not pointing out my name and not putting out my details out there. Are they going to continue talking about my story the entire time, or are they going to stop at some point? And what is this point? Is it when I've told them very personal things? It can be very confusing when you're a client and your therapist is talking about stuff you talked about in therapy on social media. And yeah, that thing is very confusing. It's very exhausting. It's sad when a therapist breaks confidentiality because you are finding yourself in a situation where you want to create content for social media and you don't know how where to draw the line, where your client ends or where therapy ends and where content creation begins. So that's a whole entire conversation that made me decide to do this live, because I was also working on a podcast episode about boundaries with clients in therapy, and this is therapist and client, the boundaries that you need to have in therapy. So this live in general, what is this live going to be about? This live is going to be about boundaries with clients, and I'm not going to go in depth because I'm going to go in depth in the podcast episode that I have prepared for you guys, and I will link that when it's ready. I'm gonna link it up and you can listen to it. Follow our podcast. It's everywhere that you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check that out. Okay, so let's talk about breaking confidentiality, especially when you are a social media therapist. I have my notebook here, that's why I'm checking up at training. As a therapist, you need to be very keen about the kind of things you talk about in therapy and the things that you talk about outside of therapy. And you need to be very keen about the things that your clients say and how you take them out of therapy and use them as examples in the world. So nobody can really put a rule out there that don't talk about X, Y, and Z. Because sometimes some contexts demand that you talk about things. So, for example, there's something in therapy that's called limits of confidentiality. If you are a client and you're listening to this, or you're someone who's considering going to therapy, your therapist is going to talk to you about something called limits of confidentiality. So, some of these limits of confidentiality include if you intend to harm yourself or you intend to harm somebody else, your therapist is bound by law to talk about it. So, by harm, I mean maybe you intend to kill somebody or you intend to kill yourself. Your therapist is bound by law to talk about it and to report that to relevant authorities or to your emergency contact, just to make sure that they can take care of you when you're feeling like things are getting overwhelming. That's a limit to confidentiality. So of course your therapist cannot keep quiet about that just because they have promised you confidentiality. And there are other types of limits of confidentiality. It's not just that one. So your therapist is meant to help you understand some of these limits of confidentiality so that when you start therapy, you know exactly what to expect and what will happen when X, Y, and Z happens. But then, as a therapist, and you're on social media, you need to be very careful. You can't go out there and start using your clients as examples for content that you're creating. So me here, when I'm creating content, you will never hear me say, there's this client I had in therapy who did X, Y, and Z. That is not something you're ever going to hear me talk about. Why? Because I know it's very easy for my clients to see themselves in the stories that I am telling. And the only way that I can tell a story about clients in therapy is if I create a whole personality that does not exist and I just ascribe characteristics to it so that I can use that personality as an example. So it's not necessarily a client that I am using. And it's important to know how to draw that line, because it can get very tricky when you don't know where the client ends and where therapy ends and where your social media content starts. As a therapist, you need to find a way to balance those two things to be able to know that confidentiality is important. Confidentiality is something that I have to uphold 24/7, and I need to protect my clients at all costs, and I need to be very, very keen so that I don't hurt my clients just because I'm creating content for the masses. Yes, talking about mental health has helped people normalize mental health conversations. Talking about mental therapists coming on the internet and talking about mental health has made it more accessible to people who do not have access to therapy and psychological material in general. And so it's not a bad thing for you to create content as a therapist. It's okay for you to create content, but you need to know where that content begins and where it ends when it comes to therapy, so that you do not use your clients as content. You do not use your clients as material for your content. You can't use your clients like that. So that can be very problematic, and I highly encourage that you think about these things hard. So when I was talking about the confidentiality and boundaries with clients when you're in therapy, there are 7 areas you need to set boundaries with your clients when it comes to therapy. And those 7 areas, I'm going to be covering them in the podcast episode that I have said I'm doing about boundaries with clients in therapy. But I want to touch on one of them, which is social media. And as a therapist, I highly, highly encourage you to go ahead and do a bit of research and make sure you have, if you are a mental health professional who has a social media presence, I highly encourage you to go ahead and create a social media policy that you share with your clients in the beginning of therapy. And if you check our website, Safe Space Arena, you're going to see that we have a terms and conditions somewhere on our website. And when you click on those terms and conditions, you're going to see it has a social media policy somewhere and a disclaimer about the content that you put on the internet, so that our clients are aware by the time they start therapy with us and by the time they engage us in any capacity that we have a social media presence and what it entails, what happens when you have a social media presence. So for you as a therapist, I highly encourage you to go and draft a very simple, straightforward social media policy that you share with your clients in the beginning of therapy, and make sure that is something you discuss by the time you're talking about informed consent with your clients. Don't wait mpaka your client is coming to tell you, by the way, why were you talking about me on the internet, until that's the time now you start presenting them with a social media policy. That's going to be detrimental. So I highly encourage you, create and draft this social media policy early in advance. And when you're talking to the client and you're discussing with the client about the informed consent, have this conversation about social media, especially if you have a social media presence, and help the client understand what it means for their therapist to be on the internet and to be creating content on the internet. This will help you stay protected as a therapist, because your client knows what you are doing, and you will also hold yourself accountable with that social media policy. You'll know that you're not supposed to be talking about your clients on the internet and using the material used that came up in therapy as content for your social media. So that is very, very important. I highly encourage you, create a social media policy and share it to your clients and talk to them about it. Don't just share it and keep quiet. Talk to them about it so that they know what you're doing. That is just a way of being more diligent, and just it's a sign of integrity for you to be able to talk to your clients about these difficult conversations. And we're not saying that, again, I'm not saying don't create content. I am saying create content, but just know that you cannot use your clients as fodder. You cannot use the stories that your clients are telling you as content for your social media. I'm going to, as I've said, I'm going to be discussing 7 key areas that you should be setting boundaries with your clients. And these 7 key areas are going to be discussed in the podcast episode that is going to be coming up soon, probably next week or sometime in the coming days. You will see it when I put it up, and I will let you know so that you have an idea of how some of these things occur. There's a question that came up today about boundaries with clients and therapists in therapy. And the question was whether you can be friends with your therapist. And I have seen a bunch of you. I put up a poll. I put up the question on Instagram, and the question was, can you be friends with your therapist? And a bunch of people were saying yes, you can be friends with your therapist. And I am highly encouraging that you do not become friends with your therapist. And there's a bunch of reasons why you should not be friends with your therapist. The first reason why you should not be friends with your therapist is because there's something in therapy called dual relationships. So the thing about dual relationships is you are not meant, as a therapist, you're not meant to have your client as your friend, because dual relationships make the relationship in therapy very complicated. So as a therapist, differentiate and separate between who you are and who the client is and what the therapeutic relationship is. Make sure that there's a difference between those two things, because if you don't separate that, the client can get very confused about the relationship in therapy, and it can also hurt their progress in therapy because they feel like they have to interact with you in a way that is outside of the therapy relationship. So dual relationships are big. Therapists already know about this, and it is the role of the therapist to communicate and enforce boundaries in therapy. It's not all on the client. The therapist has to be the person who communicates the boundaries early in advance and clearly communicates the boundaries and upholds the boundaries and enforces the consequences of breaking the boundaries, so that the client knows that actually it's a way of modeling for the client what healthy boundaries look like. So if you as a therapist cannot hold the boundaries, then how are you going to teach your clients to hold the boundaries? If you as a client cannot have a difficult conversation around the boundaries, how are you going to teach your clients to have difficult conversations about boundaries with their loved ones? You see, so it's as a therapist, you are modeling what good boundaries look like, and that's it. That's it's your role to communicate and enforce the boundaries all the time. That is on you. Again, the other reason why a therapist and a client cannot be friends is because it will be very difficult for the therapist to play both roles at the same time. There are demands that are on friendship that cannot be met by a therapist who is not really your friend, right? So there are things like, for example, let's just take a very good example. If you had a friend and this person, you've known them for a long time, they are your friend and everything, you are likely going to expect them to behave in a certain way towards you. If you have a party, you want them to come to your party. If you are going out to hang out with your other friends, you will want this friend to come with you. You will want them to support you when you are unwell. You want them to come to your family functions and all these things. But as a therapist, your therapist cannot do all those things for you. Your therapist is your therapist. Your friends are your friends. And those two things do not mix. And even you as a therapist should not want your client to be your friend in any way. So you and your therapist cannot be sending each other TikToks. You and your therapist cannot be sending each other memes. You and your therapist cannot be sharing stories as if you cannot be hanging out until you're going for coffee with your therapist. That's not how therapy works. The reason why therapy works is because of how sacred and confidential the relationship is with your therapist. The reason why therapy works as well is because of the fact that you and your therapist are not friends. If you are friends, therapy would probably not work, and if it did, I don't know how that would work, because it's unfathomable for me. So as a client, no, you can't be friends with your therapist. As a therapist, you can't be friends with your clients. Again, in therapy, the focus is on you. Therapy is for you, it's not for your therapist. And if you two become friends during therapy, it's going to be very hard for you guys to separate where therapy starts and where it ends, because now you guys are going to be trading stories. But remember, these therapy sessions are for you. They're not for your therapist. That's why you have to maintain those boundaries constantly. Make sure that boundaries are respected in therapy, just to make sure that nobody gets hurt in the process. That's very, very important. As I said, the relationship works because you and your therapist are not friends. Don't share TikToks. Don't hang out. Don't do jobs for your therapist. Don't hire your therapist to do other things for you. If you're a therapist, do not hire your clients to do work for you. You cannot hire your client acquire your accountant. It can't work. You know, if your client is a lawyer and you're having legal troubles, you can't go and hire your client's law firm to represent you. It doesn't work like that. Therapy is very sacred. The therapeutic relationship is very, very sacred. You cannot mess it up by becoming friends. It's going to just become detrimental to both parties. So avoid, because the moment you start becoming friends is the moment that things start going south very fast. Always see your clients as clients and go find your own friends. And if you feel the need to have your clients as your friends, you need to go to your own therapy. You need to go to your own supervision. Go talk to your supervisor and find out why it feels like you don't have other people to be your friends. Now you're leaning on your clients for that support. Very important. There was a question that again that came up somewhere in this live when I put up the poll about boundaries with clients. There's a question that came up if as a client you can have more than one therapist, and I put up a question on Instagram just to ask people and to gauge where everybody is. And some people said yes, you can have your therapist as your you can have more than one therapist. Some people said no, you can't have more than one therapist. And then some people said it depends. And I want to say that the actual answer is that it depends. So why, let's start with yes, why you can have more than one therapist at the same time. So for you to have more than one therapist at the same time, there has to be a number of things moving at the same time. You're either maybe seeing a personal therapist for individual therapy sessions, and you are seeing them maybe once a week or whatever, and you need another therapist when you are doing something like couples counseling. So you may find that the therapist you're seeing is not a couples counselor, and maybe you also need couples counseling at the same time as you're having your individual therapy. So in that situation, you would find yourself having two therapists at the same time. So you are going to couples counseling or on some days, and the other day you are going for individual counseling, so that you can be able to work on yourself, and then you can come and work on your situation as a couple with a couples therapist. You might find yourself in a situation where you're going for individual therapy, and you're also going for family counseling. Maybe your family is going to counseling together, uko to another therapist, but then you are also doing your own personal work with another therapist. That is totally understandable and allowed. Nobody will stop you. So in situations like that, it's very possible to have more than one therapist, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's go to the no. Why is it not advisable to have more than one therapist? Again, it depends on the situation. A situation where you would not be advised to have more than one therapist is when you are doing individual therapy or whatever kind of therapy you're doing at the same time with two different people. The reason is different therapists use different approaches for therapy. Not all therapists do not operate the same way. Yes, we have the basics that every therapist needs to do, but therapy in general, there are different types of therapy. That's the thing. There are different types of therapy, and different therapists practice different types of therapy. And so, if you are seeing this, if you're seeing two different therapists or three different therapists for the same problem at the same time, you are going to find yourself in a situation where those three therapists are using three different modalities to help you deal with whatever situation you're dealing with. And for you, because you are not a therapist, you do not understand how therapy works most of the time, you're going to find it very confusing, because you'll be like, this therapist is telling me X, Y, and Z, and this therapist is telling me this other thing, and this other therapist is telling me this other thing. So who should I follow? Who should I listen to? And how should I deal with my problem? And the thing is, all these therapists might be right in the way that they're approaching the problem, because they're approaching it from different schools of thoughts. So you'll find like there's a psychodynamic therapist, there's a CBT therapist. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a cognitive behavioral therapist, and you're also seeing maybe another type of therapist. So you have these three different types of therapists at the same time, and they're all approaching your problem from different ways, from different dimensions. That can be very confusing. That can be very exhausting for you, because these three different modalities have different requirements for treating the problem. In CBT, you're going to get a lot of homework. You're going to get a lot of things that you're supposed to work on between sessions. You might find like in psychotherapy, in psychoanalytic therapy, you probably will not have any homework, but you guys will be exploring a lot of heavy stuff, and it might feel very emotionally exhausting. And you're like, okay, which of these people is helping me? So that's why in a situation like that, it is advised that you stick to one therapist. Stick to one therapist, see how it goes. And if you are not liking the approach that this therapist is using, and you have communicated that this approach is not working for you, and the therapist is not able to adjust the approach to meet you where you are, then it is okay for you to leave and find another therapist. So that's how I would answer that question, that there's no yes or no. It just depends on where you are and what you're working on. Most people stick with one therapist, and if they don't find value out of that therapy, they go find another therapist. They can try another therapist with a different modality, just to make sure that they are getting as much as they are looking for. And yeah, that's basically the situation with having two different therapists at the same time. So with that said, I hope that this has been a valuable live conversation, and I hope you have gotten something that you can think about and you can hold on to as you continue working on yourself. As I said, and as I have said in previous lives and previous videos on this channel, everything that we talk about here is not a substitute for therapy. Everything we talk about here is not therapy. All this information is just for knowledge. This information is for creating awareness. This conversation, all this content we create is to just normalize mental health. And so if you're already seeing a therapist, do not go and tell them, hey, by the way, Jennifer said X, Y, and Z, and so let's start doing X, Y, and Z. Or, oh my gosh, Jennifer said this and this, I'm no longer going back to therapy. I highly encourage you not to do that. So if you have any questions that are specific, if you need an assessment, go to your therapist. Go to the person who is, and by the way, if you don't know where to start when you're looking for a therapist, again, you can reach out to us and we can connect you to a bunch of therapists because we have access to very many therapists. So just tell us what you need and we'll connect you to the right therapist. Yeah, so again, not a substitute for therapy, not therapy at all. This is not an assessment. I have not diagnosed you. Do not go walking around saying that I have given you everything that you need. You will not go to therapy, or you will stop your therapies because you've been listening to me. I highly encourage that you don't do that. Yeah, and if you have any questions, as usual, as always, please drop them in the comments. Send us DMs, send us emails. We are always an email away. We are very ready to answer every question that you have about mental health, about psychology, about all these things. And if you know somebody who's struggling with their mental health, again, connect them to us and we'll connect them to whatever they need. The therapist they need, we'll connect them to that therapist. If they need resources, we have a whole library. I highly encourage you to check out our library of free resources. It's on our website, www.safespacearena.wordpress.com. Check it out. We have a free library that has so many resources for almost everything: depression, anxiety, everything you can think about. It's all there. So check it out. It's on the resources tab on our website. Yeah, with that said, thank you so much for coming through to the Instagram live. Thank you so much for indulging me, and I hope you can share this video with somebody else who might benefit from it. Let's be the people who share mental health content on our WhatsApp stories and in our WhatsApp groups, and let's be the first people in our circles to talk about mental health. With that said, thank you so much for coming through. My name is Jennifer, for those who might not know me, and I will see you in the next episode. If you're a therapist, look out for the podcast that I will be releasing on boundaries in session with a client. And yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Take care of yourselves and have a good one. Bye.